So building a culture of innovation. Today we're going to take a look at some of the ways that leaders can hardwire innovation into their corporate culture. We're also going to consider how human beings, the people driving all that innovation, can hardwire or potentially even rewire the ability to drive change and the ability to develop new ways of thinking. So let me just briefly, I know you've seen their bios, but let me just briefly introduce our panel. Susan Santiago is the Senior Vice President, America's Operational Experiences at Hyatt Hotels Corporation. Scott Neal is the Senior Vice President of Worldwide Sales and Marketing at Gulfstream. And Robert Keegan is the Meehan Professor of Adult Learning and Professional Development at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
I thought we would start with Dr. Keegan. So innovation depends on our ability to think outside the box, to do things differently, to push ourselves beyond what is familiar and comfortable. What does your research suggest about grown-ups, adults' abilities to do that?
Yeah, so my team at Harvard has been, for the last 3 years, we've been studying highly innovative, highly development supporting, I mean personal development supporting cultures. We scanned the country for organizations that we thought would be, that are doing this at the highest level. We came up with 3 of them. One of them is Decurion here in Los Angeles, Next Jump in New York, and Bridgewater. Some of you, I'm sure, were at the interview I did with Ray Dalio yesterday. What all these organizations, very different in many ways, what they all have in common, the first thing is that they kind of recognize that in the ordinary organization, everybody is doing a second job that no one's paying them for, and that second job is covering their rear ends, looking good, managing other people's favorable impressions of them, trying to avoid making mistakes, looking at their best. And in these organizations, no one's doing the second job. How do you create a safe enough culture for mistake making where people recognize they were hired not because somebody thought they were perfect, but because somebody thought they were good? And these organizations, just to tick off, Willow, just a couple of the features in these organizations, much greater openness to mistake making, kind of the entrepreneurial approach to, you know, failing fast, failing forward, much different approach to conflict. Instead of dampening it down, you see that it can be a resource. Much different approach to hierarchy. Rank doesn't have its usual privileges. You better be accustomed to having somebody half your age come up to you, you know, and challenge you.
I think these days we all are accustomed to that. I don't know about your workplaces, but I feel like somebody half my age is challenging me just about every time I turn around. But I'll ask you all to comment on that too.
Job as a tow rope, you know, that if you have already the capabilities to do your job at an excellent level in these organizations, this isn't considered a good fit because there's no developmental stretch in it. So, you know, the job should be one that is actually, you're in over your heads and at the beginning, and it kind of forces you to develop capabilities. Just when you've developed them, can do the job well.
So is that the ideal scenario for adult development, to be in a situation where you were in just a little bit over your head, but yet you're in an environment of support?
Exactly. You have to have this rich combination of challenge and support. If it's too much challenge and too little support, it just generates more and more defensive routines. It's just hard to psychologically survive. If it's very comfortable and very supportive but insufficiently challenging, it might be a good vacation environment, but that is not an environment that is going to stimulate growth or innovation. I think what these cultures do is they ramp up both the challenge and the support to dramatically high levels.
Interesting. So I'd like to get the perspective, both of you all, about how you drive innovation, how you set up, how you create a culture, how you embed this in your DNA. Scott, let me start with you at Gulfstream. So Gulfstream, leader in technologically advanced aviation. Your numbers are synonymous with, you know, a new jet with a new 6, a new 7, a new is kind of synonymous with the next wave. But what institutional structures do you have in place that's driving and supporting that kind of innovation?
Well, we have a few. We've been doing this for a long time, and we've always tried to stay at the front edge of innovation and technology. So some simple things and some complicated things. And one of the simple things we do is throughout the entire enterprise, we have a system called Your Ideas at Work, where any employee in the company can submit ideas on any given day at their level. And it encourages thought, it encourages creativity, it encourages risk-taking. And we had, I think last year, 47,000 Your Ideas at Work.
Right, so 47,000, you're out of, what is your employee
Out of about
base?
15,000 employees, so
15,000,
roughly
wow.
about 3 per employee.
So explain the structure of that, because you're managing an enormous, I mean, that's quite a suggestion box you got going there. So
It is, and
how
it's-
do you mine it? How do you triage it? How do you make sure that somebody is, first of all, that those people feel heard,
Right.
and recognized, and that you are sifting out the best ideas?
So it's not micromanaged, and so they really manage it at the basic levels of the company, from a mechanic on the floor to a vice president in sales. So anybody can participate. But what we do is we leave it up pretty much to the individual divisions of the company to allow those ideas to foster and grow, and they typically rise to the top. And so once they raise to a level of interest, for innovation or for creating change in the company, then we take a more critical look at it from a business perspective.
But who determines whether they rise to the level of interest? And how do you make sure that there aren't, that those institutional supports or controls, which you have to have in place with that volume,
Right.
Are actually allowing the good ideas to surface?
So it surfaces through individual managers to begin with, and then we actually have some cross-functional teams that are comprised of groups from all over the company that will meet to review the ideas, and then again determine what we may invest in and make change to. We've done that pretty significantly. I've got some stories I can share in a little while, but we've invested a lot of money in innovation based upon ideas that have generated from all levels of the company.
Well, give us an example.
Well, I'll give you one, and even though we make airplanes, it involves nuclear submarines. So
Okay, good.
we have a parent company in General Dynamics that makes nuclear submarines. And if you think about a submarine, you need to keep submarines extremely quiet, right? And you need to keep noise on the inside of a submarine. You don't want to be found where you are. So at Gulfstream, we pay a lot of attention to the comfort of our airplanes in the interiors. And we like to keep the noise levels in the interiors of our airplanes as low as we can. And so we have chased that for years and years to really take noise out of the airplane. So we went to our sister company, Electric Boat, up in Connecticut, and we said, we'd like to steal some of your PhDs to come down and help Gulfstream. They're used to keeping noise inside of submarines. We would like to keep noise out of our airplanes. And so they actually came down, and we asked them what they needed. And they said, well, we'd like an acoustics chamber. So we spent millions and millions of dollars to build a hemi-anechoic acoustics chamber. And we didn't give them a manual. We didn't give them a set of instructions. We just said, we'd like to make our airplanes quieter. We invested in the laboratory for them to go pursue this, and they took off running. And I'll give you an example that I saw personally. I went in there one day, and they can test anything on the airplane for noise. And they had a curtain hanging in the noise chamber one day, and I said, what's the curtain for? And they said, well, we're testing whether or not different stitch patterns in the curtain have a different acoustic property in the side of the airplane. So that was one example of how they really took the ball, ran with it, but the company believed in their capabilities, their ideas, and we invested millions and millions of dollars. And it's translated into us having the quietest airplane cabins in business aviation.
Wow, interesting. Susan, give us a sense, at Hyatt, you approached innovation and development of new products and services in a very specific way, taking design thinking and turning it into what you call Hyatt thinking. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Sure. So we're fairly new on the innovation journey, if you will, if you realize that we're a 50-year-old company. But just 5 years ago, our senior leadership decided that we really needed to, in order to separate ourselves from the competition, we had to really focus on how we were going to infuse innovation into our culture. And historically, the hospitality industry, it's really been anticipating needs and not necessarily really spending time to understand the deep need of either a guest or a colleague. So about 5 years ago, our senior leadership, we hired a chief innovation officer who then took our senior leadership along with the design school at Stanford and actually spent time with them at learning what the process of design thinking is. And that's that idea of really having empathy interviews and getting to a true depth of a need, and then iterating very quickly, prototyping, failing fast, and starting over again. That whole idea and that whole process was something that we really wanted to instill into all of our 90,000 colleagues across the globe.
So you taught that to 90,000 employees?
Over time.
They all took a class in design?
Over time, yeah. So what we did is we identified, first of all, the senior leadership as being the experts in that, and then we moved to training all of our general managers across the globe in that process. And then we actually created what we called lab hotels. We had 9 lab hotels in which we then said, now let's teach this. We called it changing the conversation, but truly understanding how to have an empathy interview and the depth of getting to the need behind the need.
Okay, what's an empathy interview?
So an empathy interview, or an example of one would be, is if you're trying to understand, if we took food and beverage, for example, if I wanted to understand how I could be innovative in creating a menu or a need that a guest has, it's where you start an interview, not necessarily solution-based. You would just sit down and I would be sitting with you and I'd say, Willow, share with me the most impactful meal you've ever had. And you would probably say it was with my family at Thanksgiving or something like that. And then I would say, well, tell me more about that. And you continue to get deeper and deeper and deeper, using why and continuing to ask why to get to the true need. What was the emotion behind why that was so important to you? And you can really start to determine from there what those needs are and how you can design around that. And historically, at least in our industry, we would stop with the first answer. And then we would, because we were the experts, decide what we were going to do from there. We weren't truly getting to the true need. So we found that we were actually instituting things that didn't necessarily resonate deeply with our guests. And so as we started to dive deeper into these empathy interviews, we've realized that, it's not the first thing that you think is the solution. Sometimes you have to dive deeper to really understand what the need is. And that was, quite honestly, our biggest challenge, is getting our teams comfortable with empathy interviewing, because you have to start flaring out in very general to slowly move to a very deep need. And we have a tendency to, we've prided ourselves actually as an industry in being able to have a conversation and then from that quick conversation be able to move to solution and not really spend the time to truly put yourself in the shoes of your guest or your colleagues.
So listening as the critical first step.
Deeper
in innovation.
listening, deeper sense of
Tell me
listening.
a little bit about the lab hotels. How do they function? What do they do? What are some of the innovations that they've been piloting and testing?
Sure. So we started across the globe because we did want to have an assurance that the process was going to work globally, right? There's different impacts culturally of, so an example, when we had our lab hotel in Asia, the culture of the Asian culture was not comfortable with getting very close and very deep. So this idea of really digging in and getting deeper into those conversations, it was a harder process for them to learn and get comfortable with. But basically we asked the lab hotels to conduct empathy interviews both with guests and with colleagues, and to identify some needs and just test things and get comfortable with failing. So an example of one point of view and one need that came out from one of the lab hotels is in spending time with our female travelers, we started to really get to a deeper need that our female travelers had. What were the needs that they had when they're traveling? And from that, we created what we call the women's experience, where we actually went into our guest rooms and we redesigned bathrooms so that the lighting was better when you're putting on your makeup, for those of you out there that can appreciate that. Even just down to the magazines that were in the room. If you went into a hotel room prior to that, in any of our hotels, you'd find, GQ and Golf Digest. Now we've, introduced, OWN magazine and some other things so that you've got this balance of what the female traveler needs. So lighter robes in the rooms, slippers that were lighter. When you start to think about how rooms were designed historically in the experience of a hotel, it was not necessarily supportive of what the female traveler's needs were. So that was something that came out of one of the lab hotels. We tested it in many iterations of it. And then we actually launched that as a marketing initiative across the globe, and it's been extremely successful with our female travelers.
And how do you determine which of your hotels is going to become a lab hotel?
Yeah, so we started with the 9 hotels, and really it was more about, the lab hotel was about ensuring that the process of design thinking was going to be able to be accepted by our colleagues. Once they got comfortable with that and we saw that this was working, we now have every hotel is a lab hotel. So we've really kind of extended that out. The initial test of a lab hotel was to make sure that we had the training in place appropriately to ensure that the process was inserted into the culture.
So, Bob, how important is it for an organization to really set the stage for driving and supporting innovation by articulating a set of beliefs around it? In the case of Hyatt, it was very specific around now Hyatt thinking based on design thinking. How important is that, or can it be just intuitive?
I think, the answer is what you would expect, that the more powerfully aligned people are in what it is we're doing. I'm impressed that both organizations really are taking a kind of learning approach, right? I come from a school of education, not a school of management. I'm interested in the ways in which more and more companies recognize that they have to be schools. The whole idea of a lab, hotel is a place to kind of learn from. And it sounds like in both cases that you're trying to create a really learning-rich environment. The researcher in me wants to kind of ask each of you.
Go for it.
Like, okay, what are the ways, do people identify their own growing edge, right? Like it's easy to talk about when people get over their discomfort. But, before that, there's some kind of identification of what's a barrier for them, what's blocking them. In these organizations that we've been studying, we call them DDOs, deliberately developmental organization. You can go in and pick 5 people at random, and you should be able to get pretty good answers to questions like, what do you recognize as a personal weakness that you're trying to overcome? On a how regular a basis do you get a chance to engage it? Who knows about it? Who supports it? I'd just love to hear, each of you talk a little about that.
Sure. You want to go first?
Sure.
Well, I think at least for our organization, we're driven through purpose, which is caring for people so they can be their best. And when it comes to the development of our talent, we are extremely focused on having those honest conversations about where are you going, what are your goals, and how are we going to help you to get there. And when you say where are your goals, it's what are your opportunities for growth as well. We have started actually with what we call 360 evaluations, where it's also not just about the manager speaking to the associate, but it's a 360-degree review where the associate's also reviewing the manager. And here's some things you have to work on to help me be my best. And this is something that we've just really started, again, came out of some empathy interviews we did, that we're starting to take this different approach. But the developmental structure, I would say that we're very advanced in that piece, where if you spoke to any of our general managers at every level of the organization, they have a development plan in place and know what those things are that they need to work on to get to where they're going to be able to be their best. But I kind of had an aha moment when you spoke earlier, when you said that you have to be someone out of your comfort zone as well. Because when I think about Hyatt and 57 years old, we were known as being the innovators, specifically in food and beverage, years ago. And when I think about why that is, and I just had the aha moment, when we first started as an organization, we had a very strong growth trajectory very quickly. And you can speak to any general manager that back 20, 30 years ago got put into that position, and they would all say, I was not ready for it. I was so in over my head. And, you know, F&B directors and rooms execs, they all had that little bit of an edge, and they had to figure it out. And then we balanced off where we actually didn't have a lot of growth in the company. And so then we created all of these experts. And that's our challenge right now, is going back into this innovative culture, because you have all of these general managers, directors of food and beverage, rooms that all now are the experts, and it's hard for them psychologically now. They don't feel that, not that they don't feel, but it's harder for them. They don't feel that edge that, wow, I got to figure this out.
Yeah. They like their expertise,
they're comfortable.
I'm sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I had this aha moment while you were just sharing that, and that's, I think, where we're really, that's the opportunity we have, is instilling this back, that edge. You need to get that edge again and get a little bit out of your comfort zone in order for us to ensure that this culture of innovation continues moving forward.
And at Gulfstream, we have a lot of similarities. Actually, we use the 360 process throughout the entire company. It's been extremely valuable. And one of the things we try to instill that I think support in our employees that supports innovation is to overcome the fear of failure. So to feel free to take a risk, feel free to present that idea that may be outside of the box, but just understand that you have the ability to do that, have the confidence to do it, and there won't be any repercussion. There's only good that can come of it.
Although I was teasing Scott, you really don't want to hear an aircraft manufacturer say fear of failure. It's really
Not much
So
an
what if
option
a
for
few
us.
planes fall out of the sky?
No.
But I guess specifically, because we hear this so often now, you know, fail early, fail often, you know, rinse and repeat, do it again. But what is the reaction to failure specifically?
For us, the reaction to failure is change and improvement. You know, it's not somebody gets a poor performance score, you know, because failures are going to happen all the time. Now, you balance those with successes, of course, but it's learning from your failures. And, you know, we encountered one ourselves with innovation about 8 years ago, where we designed a new interior for an airplane, and we thought we were really innovative, and it was, but we didn't engage our customer base enough. And so we learned a lot of lessons early on, that to be innovative, you really need a collaboration of risk-taking from not only your employees, but your customers and your suppliers to some degree. So we've created now processes to bring the customer very close to our business and our suppliers, so we don't repeat that in the future, and it's worked extremely well. And this group is a group of both employees and customers that are not afraid to raise their hand and give you either constructive or very critical feedback if we've done something wrong. It's been very, very beneficial for Gulfstream. We have a group of customers that we bring in twice a year, and we show them behind the curtain, if you will. So they get to have an input on future products, and they give us what they'd like to see. We tell them what we're thinking about. And so it's a great sounding board, but it allows us to have better fidelity when we're trying to innovate, and we're not just taking risk for the sake of risk.
Or you're not doing the cool stuff because it's cool.
That's
You're doing
exactly
the cool stuff
right.
because your customers are saying this is really what we want.
What we want and what makes sense, and is it going to be reliable, and is the cabin going to be quiet, and you know, are the engines going to be efficient, and all those things.
So Bob, we heard both Scott and Susan talk about the 360, this 360 process. They describe it very positively as something that's encouraging their employee base, managers, to kind of grow and add new skills and expertise. But you also hear a lot of flat-out terror about the 360
Absolutely.
process. So what do you make of that process, and how can companies use it so that you maximize the benefits?
This is the kind of thing that you know, Ray Dalio is talking about, of, you know, getting over your ego. The ordinary organization is a sort of performance culture, in the sense that work becomes a performance. The last thing you want to do is fail. Every review, you hold your breath. You know, I hope I did well. In an innovative culture, I think you have a whole different atmosphere. It's more a spirit of practicing. You know, when you're practicing, you expect to screw up. You want to get lots of feedback. You're not holding your breath every second, did I do okay? But we spend so much time in this performance mode, wanting to make sure we're doing a good job. How nervous were we before we walked out on stage here? Why? Why should we be nervous? I mean, what are we doing? You know, we're just having a conversation. But it just gets so built into the DNA. So I think the key thing in an innovation culture is beginning to shift. It's ironic because you become more high performing in a business sense by actually having less of a performance culture where you're always at a certain level acting. I think the biggest waste of energy in companies is, you know, this second job, managing other people's, you know, good impression of you.
I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about talent and your talent pipeline. Starting with, how important is diversity? Diversity of background, diversity of thinking, diversity of personality, diversity of skill sets in driving innovation at your companies?
Go ahead.
Well, it's critical for Gulfstream. You know, we need to diversify. We've become a much more global company over the past 15 years. And in relation to that, we've had to become a much more capable, diverse company. We're doing business.
And diverse means what in your context?
Oh, everything. Diversity of people, diversity of culture, diversity of language and skill, education. I mean, it's a broad diversity. Now, we have a very robust diversity, inclusion, and program at Gulfstream. But really everything, whether it's diversity of engineering talent or language talent, because we're doing business in so many countries around the world. We've really had to grow our business from being a sleepy little company in southern Georgia on the coast to really a global company now with 15,000 employees. So we didn't have a choice but to kind of diversify our thought, our people, our processes. And we've done a pretty good job of that. It continues. But diversity and inclusion, very, very important for the company, very important for General Dynamics. We have a female CEO, chairman and CEO of General Dynamics. Lots of diverse and female employees in senior positions throughout Gulfstream. We hire from all over the world now. We have offices in Hong Kong, Singapore, Beijing, Sao Paulo, London, really a global footprint. So we've had to diversify more than we were in the past. It's been successful, and we'll continue to do it.
Susan, I know that you've worked really hard to identify and overcome obstacles to women's advancement in not just in Hyatt, but in the hotel industry overall. Why was that something that was important? How were you able to do that? What were some of the obstacles that you identified?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, you know, Hyatt is a global company, so when you talk about diversity, just in our colleagues and in our guests, it's innate in our industry. But what we did find through, again, empathy interviews is, and through just looking at our diversity and inclusion initiative, we have a very strong diversity and inclusion program throughout the entire organization. But what we saw was there, not only in our company, but in the industry, there has been a challenge with females moving up to senior leadership positions. And so we conducted a series of empathy interviews and actually created a business resource group called Women at Hyatt. And we really focus on what are those obstacles that are preventing women from wanting to grow within the industry, and then specifically within Hyatt. And what we find, you know, it's pretty much a 50-50 split between male, female at the assistant department head level. Then when we move up to what we call our division head level, which would be our leadership committee, those numbers start to really skew more male. And what we're finding in these empathy interviews is at the point in time that women are at that decision-making process, they're deciding if they want to have a career or a family, just because of the challenges innately in those positions, time, you know, the amount of time that they have to spend committed to in the hotel, the amount of travel that they have to do, the fact that we transfer our GMs almost every 2 years. So there are these obstacles that we're identifying that we're now looking at how can we remove those obstacles, because if we don't, we're not ever going to gain any growth in this, and we're not going to allow that. And to be quite honest, in some of these issues, as we're looking at them as female obstacles, they're male obstacles also.
They're family obstacles.
But they're just
in a lot of
family
ways.
issues.
So,
right?
but how do you, in a business where you have to move your GMs around to give them different experiences, how do you manage the downside of that, which is the great disruption to families?
Well, and I think the answer is in innovation, because you can be challenged in the same location just depending on the culture. If you have an innovative culture, you're always challenged. You're always challenged to find new experiences, to find new solutions. It's the fact that we've not necessarily created those innovative cultures in every single hotel. So I shouldn't, in theory, I shouldn't have to move to gain different experiences. I should be gaining different experiences within my own hotel every day if I'm truly, if I have an innovative culture. So, that's one theory and one idea is, and we also there's other opportunities for you to move within the organization, even within the same city. We have multi-city hotels in multiple hotels in cities that we could also provide that as a solution. So we don't have all the answers right now, but we do know that we're very committed. We have 36 chapters now of Women at Hyatt that we have now utilized the business resource group as a focus group for us internally as well to be able to solve for some of these needs that we know are out there.
And do you have any data about changes at the senior-most levels yet of the organization to be able to measure impact?
We have the baseline now. We have had growth, especially in the corporate office at the senior level, at the C-suite level. My role is I'm the first female in this role. So in the last 2 years, we've had quite a bit of growth at the C-suite and the senior vice president level from the corporate perspective. From the GM level, we've seen some growth, but not as much as we know we want to see into the future. So we still have some obstacles. The reality is we still have to, the demands that are put on the general manager overall. Again, how many hours you have to spend there and things like that. And we were talking about this too internally. We have to also highlight those successes. We tend to focus on the ones that aren't successful mothers. We have we have female GMs that are very successful mothers and have raised a family being a general manager. We have to find ways to highlight that more. So this network, the Women at Hyatt network, is the vehicle we see that should help us to get to that solution, and then creating some mentorship programs as well through it.
Talking about diversity, Bob, when you think about what you know as sort of best practices or best principles for developing, creating an innovative culture, does that, how do generational differences factor into that? Do millennials thrive in different support structures than boomers, for example?
Well, there's a lot of research that suggests that there are certain kinds of differences. Millennials, for example, one of their biggest criticisms of traditional business arrangements is that they hear so little really about how they're doing. They feel starved for feedback. I don't know if there's something about boomers. The thing you can absolutely be certain about boomers is they're older than millennials, okay? So, will tomorrow's, millennials become comfortable with their expertise too? I don't know. Is it, endemic to the millennials' current age, or a different kind of generation? But I think that all kinds of diversities create a richer pool for ongoing learning, and that has to do not just with age, but experience. And the common thing is you want diversities of strengths. It's also good to have diversities of weaknesses and having people be able to help each other.
And how do you hire for that?
The interesting thing about the organizations that we studied, I'm supposed to plug the book, by the way. I forgot to plug the book. This book just came out, this study, and it's called An Everyone Culture, and you're all supposed to buy 5 copies. One thing that's common to these organizations is that to an unusual extent, they spend each one of them, a lot of time and energy in the hiring process, trying to really give people a sense that they are entering a different kind of culture, and it becomes almost an educational experience. In many cases, people who end up not getting hired are still grateful for the time that they've spent. And why? Because the process of hiring is actually about getting to really know who you are and getting to know, your strengths and your own growing edge, and getting beyond that usual thing. Tell me about a weakness. Oh, well, one of my weaknesses is that I just tend to overwork and I just tend to throw myself into everything. And it's one of these wonderful weaknesses, But you need to, in the interviewing, you need to get to a point where people tell you about weaknesses that they're actually embarrassed about,
So how do you do that? Give us some suggestions how you do that.
Well, it amounts to kind of explaining to people that you're performing right now, right? You're actually, in this interview, you're actually trying to be your best self. And I know it makes sense for you to think about doing it that way, but one of the leaders at Decurion has this wonderful expression: you can feast on your weaknesses or starve on your ego. And it completely flips the whole frame. It's kind of like, if you're going to perform throughout this job interview, we might as well just end it, because how good are you going to actually do in the job itself where you're going to keep performing? So it becomes, first of all, it's a series of interviews. There's a kind of trust that's built up. You come to learn about kind of the life of the person. I mean, a hire, as every one of you knows, is a tremendously important decision, and a mistake in a hiring is a tremendously costly kind of thing. I think in general, it might be good to have both of you speak to this. I think in general, companies spend too little time and investment in the processes of hiring.
Yeah.
So to ask both of you, what are the kinds of people that you think do well in your culture?
Right.
And how do you attract and hire for that?
So this has been a shift for us, because traditionally we would hire mostly for technical skill, that historically. What we're looking at now is it's less about the IQ and it's more about the EQ. And
because that has to sync up with your empathy interviews,
exactly,
right? You have to hire people who are good at that.
Who know how to connect and can truly connect. And to your point, how do you measure that, and how do you, in an interview process, how do you get to that very quickly? I don't think there's one answer to that. I think there's a lot of technique, there's a lot of skill. The more you do it, the more you get comfortable with it. One of the things that as I'm interviewing now, I basically say, you're not going to fail here. So let's just start with that premise, and you get a completely different reaction, and more of an honesty, and it's not just going through the process of an interview. And the questions are much different in an interview now than they were 5-10 years ago, at least for our organization. And we're really trying to get to that. Do you have the ability to truly connect and to be humble, and to be able to express your vulnerabilities and be comfortable with them, so that you can utilize your strengths and then build on your weaknesses to get to this culture? It's a challenge. I don't think there's one. If there was a silver bullet, I think we'd all love to have it.
It is a challenge for us as well, and we have to deal with a lot of technical skills and a lot of employees that are FAA certified to work on airplanes and things like that, and pilots that are certified and things like that. But as important as anything on the resume or any certification or approval are the people skills. And you want to make sure that you hire people that will fit in your culture and your
What does that mean
culture.
for Gulfstream? What are the traits, not the technical skills, that you think fit in your culture and people with them will thrive in your culture?
Well, it's an inclusive attitude. It's a attitude of not failing. That anything is possible. We have a very loyal workforce at Gulfstream. We have people that have been with the company many, many years. I was at a luncheon back in January where we had about 250 people who just this year had hit their anniversary at 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, and 50 years with the company. So we've got a lot of people that have been around a long time. But again, we are growing globally. So they've got to be adaptable. They've got to be adaptable to our growing company in terms of both growing size-wise, just revenues and airplane deliveries and all those things, but also internationally. We like people that think outside the box, that aren't afraid to take risks. And I quite often ask people in interviews, rather than talk about the strengths where you get the answer that Bob mentioned, is, what makes you uncomfortable? What are your concerns? And so you try to draw them out, and we've got a great workforce. But it is a challenge, and being in Southeast Georgia on the coast, we have to look for talent in lots of different places, including the local area. So we've become pretty good at finding good talent.
I can just give you one example. At NextJump, they kind of have this notion that it's good.
What is NextJump?
NextJump is an e-commerce business, like a $2 billion e-commerce business. They have this notion that it's good to be confident. It's not good to be so confident that you always think you're right, and let's call that what it is, arrogance. It's good to be humble. It's not good to be so humble that you're undermining yourself. Let's call that what it is, insecurity. They say, look, everybody leans a little bit or more than a little bit in one direction or another. They even have a joke there that kind of, you all know whether you tend to lean more insecure or more arrogant. How many of you think you would tend to lean more insecure? The insecure people always raise their hand. The arrogant people don't even like to use the term arrogant, and they're sitting there thinking, I don't even know if I accept this whole thing. They're arrogant, okay? So the whole notion is, look, we're all a little bit or more than a little bit leaning in one direction or the other. And you get at this in the interview so that it's just fine. And you cannot spend, Willow, 30 minutes with an employee at NextJump without their letting you know. Yeah, I work on this, and by the way, I tend to lean arrogant, so everybody knows what direction they lean in. They have practices. The insecure people, tend to speak little and late in a meeting. So they have a job, and their job is to get their voice in fast and speak up first. The arrogant people tend to dominate the meeting, talk first and talk too much, and they have the opportunity to practice right in the meeting itself, holding their tongue, waiting till the end of the meeting. But you don't come out of the interview process without already, knowing it's true. I lean a little bit in this direction or that direction. And I think also in these companies, it's kind of like, now that we've shown you a lot of your own issues, if I were to tell you that working here every day is going to be about having the chance to work on these issues, what's your reaction to that? And one group is like, thank you very much, I don't think I want to work here. That's easy. There's another group that's kind of like, I think I could stand it, I think I could bear it. And then there's a third group that's like, you mean you're going to pay me for this? I'm gonna have a chance to work on myself like this, and you're going to pay me? Obviously, that's your prime group, but also converting that second group into the third group.
Interesting. So if you were going to either go on to run a different company today or start a company, run a division of a company, what is the first thing that you would do to set the stage for building an innovative culture?
Well, I'll take that one. All right.
Great.
I think I would try to convey the message and the thinking that really no idea is a bad idea. Nothing is off the table that, to excel as a corporation, to grow as a company, to grow your people, your products, you've got to be innovative, and that's going to be driven by ideas and people, coming from people. So I think I would create an atmosphere where there wasn't fear of bringing ideas forward and fear of repercussion for a bad idea. Because we learn from bad ideas, and you succeed on the good ones.
You took my answer. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think from the learnings that we've had, the biggest opportunity was ensuring that you have the ability to get to true needs, because you truly can't be innovative if you can't get to the true need. And whether that's instilling a process or a training, but making sure that the team is comfortable with that and how to do that, because that's where we saw was kind of our obstacle, our biggest obstacle was really, truly, and to this day, we continue to do refresher courses on empathy interviews, because it is something that it's a skill that you have to learn. And if you don't have that skill, then this culture of innovation and creativity and being comfortable with failing and that all comes after you truly understand the need. So identifying a way to make sure that everyone's comfortable with that process would be extremely important.
And you?
Well, I'm an adult developmental psychologist. When I started graduate school in the 70s, if you were a developmental psychologist, it literally meant you studied infants and children because there was no field of adult development. We thought you get as tall as you get to in your early 20s, and the mind and the brain has developed about as much as it's going to. That's what we believed, just a generation ago. I don't think our companies have yet caught up with the science of adult development. Your organization's only going to go as far as your people will take you. Your people they all need to keep growing. Organizations and their people can be much, much greater contributors to each other's flourishing. So that's the start of it all, that this is a place where we're going to do a job, we're going to do the job well. But this is the place where everyone, that's why we call it the book An Everyone Culture, is going to have a chance to grow for the benefit of the individuals and the benefit of the organization, each hand, kind of holding the other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, good, because you've inspired us to keep growing, keep learning.
Yes.
I'm going to turn to the audience now to see if you all have any questions. Great. I think there's a mic coming around.
There are
Is that
mic
true?
runners. You wave your hand.
And there's a
the
whole
runners
bunch
will
in the
come
front
to you.
row if we have a microphone at the ready. Actually, you know what? If you want to just, if somebody in the front feels like they have a booming, you want to, while we're waiting for the mics.
My name is Scotty. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. I would say that in a culture of innovation, there's still a spirit. When I think about innovation within aviation, I think about the bold and daring of the Wright brothers, Skunk Works program, the Apollo program. Just daunting challenges that consumed by a lot of failures, but led to some amazing things. What are the challenges you face in the day-to-day cultivation of that spirit, that innovative spirit to keep alive?
Well, Colonel, thanks for your service, first of all. At Gulfstream, it is airplanes.
To repeat the question.
In essence, how do you keep a spirit of innovation alive day to day?
So at Gulfstream, which is airplanes, that's our main business. It is, as we plan for the future with our products, what can we do next? What is possible? And airplanes and airplane technology don't change overnight or quickly. But you've always got to be looking ahead to that next possibility. So for instance, right now, even though we don't have a formal airplane program, Gulfstream invests in supersonic technology. So we have a group that we fund every year within the company to really look at what's possible with supersonic flight. So even though we don't have a supersonic aircraft, we are trying to see what's possible. What can you do? What conditions need to exist for us to pursue a supersonic aircraft in the future? And it's difficult because the payoff for an investment from something like that is probably decades in the future. But unless you take that forward-looking approach now, you'll never get there. So that's one example at Gulfstream.
Susan, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think for us it's storytelling. We share a lot of stories of successes and failures. We have recognition programs in place for those successful ideas that have been elevated to a point where we can scale them across the organization. And so it's that constant storytelling, just sharing stories. We've got an intranet where we share stories of successful, not only successes, but failures. And how we failed fast. And that, quite honestly, is, I think, the bigger piece for our organization is we have to get much more comfortable with failing fast and celebrating those failures. But it comes through those storytelling and really sharing those stories, whether it's in our pre-shifts daily that we have with our colleagues. Like I said, through our intranet, we have a innovation award that our president awards to some hotels that have identified something that can be scaled throughout the organization. So that's, I think, how we keep that spirit alive.
And then you have right here.
Thank you.
And then,
Hi there, Eric Tremonti, and thank you very much for the panel. I appreciate it. 3 questions I'm confident can be answered back to back to back, so we won't ramble on too much. But number 1, what was the decision to become an innovative culture? Number 2, the short-term ROI on that. And number 3, why aren't more organizations focusing on innovation and an innovative culture?
Long answers,
Maybe do
short answers.
you want to talk about why they're not focusing on it? Because I think maybe you might be able to
Yeah,
address that.
I might say quickly, you know, that we scanned the country, as I said, for what we thought were the most developmentally rich cultures. We found these 3. We didn't look at all at how successful they were to get to the ROI issue first, how successful they were by conventional metrics. And of course, we were very happy to discover that all 3 of them are enormously successful, because people could say, yes, this is a great business to grow people, but it's a lousy business and they're soon going to go out of business. So, all 3 of these organizations, those of you who were here for the Bridgewater interview, I mean, you know that like Bridgewater is the only financial services organization that anticipated the financial crisis and so on. So I think the ROI, is pretty impressive. From my point of view, the biggest barrier is this whole thing of getting beyond that part, of ourselves, whatever you want to call it, that feels like we need to always look good. It's the whole difference between what Carol Dweck calls the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. And creating a growth mindset individually and collectively in the organization is the biggest challenge. The barrier to it is that you have to come up against your own limitations and come to regard these not as a source of your humiliation, but as a source of your becoming a bigger and better version of yourself. And it's hard to do.
I'm going to go to... We have one right. Okay, and then can you bring one to the front, this lady in the red dress? Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, my name is Charles Chase. I run the Revolutionary Technology Group at the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. So our job is to develop game-changing breakthrough technologies that have a significant impact on our systems. And frequently in our work, we'll come up with innovations that are orthogonal to our main mission, say commercial applications versus defense applications. And I was just wondering if you had any insights on how to take advantage of these innovations that are orthogonal to the main mission.
Interesting question. We're a company that has, not to the degree that you do at Skunk Works, but has some of the same opportunities. We have a military component to our business and a civilian component, commercial component. And we have found that some of those technologies that were originally destined for military applications make it onto the commercial side. So if you look back in our industry, things like synthetic vision and head-up display and fly-by-wire, all those things started out of military applications that we had the opportunity over time to put them into our commercial products. So there is an opportunity. We've got one right now where we're in collaboration with BAE Systems, where they've created a new fly-by-wire system for our cockpit on our next generation aircraft, and they are active side stick controllers, again, another military application. So there are possibilities to have that translate to commercial applications.
Do you want to go ahead?
Hi, my name is Nina Sani, and I'm a product designer at Pivotal Labs. We actually do the empathy research, and I'm also a Milken Scholar 2006. So my question is, we've been talking about innovation, we've been talking about failure, but a lot of the companies that I've worked for or worked with, because I'm a consultant, and we're trying to get the empathy research, struggle with the ambiguity of it all, of the process. So I'm kind of curious how you guys have dealt with that ambiguity and settled it with companies that aren't used to it.
Yeah, it was our biggest challenge was the whole idea of flaring out. If you know the process, you have to start really. And we as an industry, and specifically in Hyatt, we go to solution immediately. I mean, that's why we've been successful, right? For so many years. So it was a lot of training and a lot of repetition and a lot of examples, and again, these lab hotels really sharing stories of how what their struggles were and how to get them past that. And again, it's a day-to-day. It doesn't just, it's not something that now we're fixed and we've got this thing figured out. We every day have to continue to remind ourselves why we're doing this, and it kind of goes back to the other question is, for us, you know, we realized as an organization that this industry can very quickly become a commodity, and if we do not become innovative, we would become a commodity, and we are going to use innovation as a way to separate ourselves from the competition and really make those true connections to our guests that we know that they want. So it's a lot of work. It's daily work, but you can see the progress being made.
And I thought, Bob, that you might have some comments for us about creating a space where employees, people can thrive within ambiguity. Because I would imagine for many, that's an uncomfortable place to be.
Yeah, the orientation is to take a problem-solving approach, right? I mean, in a learning organization, an innovative organization, you want not only to be solving problems, but seeing the way problems can solve you, right? If you solve a problem too quickly, you can be pretty sure you're the same person and the same organization coming out of the problem as you were going into it, right? If you let the problem reflect back, what can we learn from even having the problem? What are the basic assumptions, you know, that we're holding that create this? Then you have the chance to actually learn from the problem, you know, have the problem solve you. I think the key thing, though, really, in innovation is, like, why are we doing it? Why do we want it? If you only want it for, like, say, business success in the conventional terms, you may be ultimately much less innovative. If you actually think about growing your people and growing your company as not competing values but complementary ones, then I think you're going to be much more likely to be naturally innovative, not just as a means to a simple end, but to fulfill the biggest mission that I'm sure both of your organizations have as well, that people thrive there as well as having the business thrive.
Great.
Yeah, it completely supports our purpose, caring for people so they can be their best and evolving leaders and be contributors back into the community at the end of the day. So that's what we all want.
I'd like to thank you, Susan Santiago. We'll all be staying at Hyatt. We'll be buying Everyone Culture. Scott Neal, wish we'd all be buying a Gulfstream, but maybe some of you will be. Thank you all, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.